Hey, what's up? It's Tackless, and today we're going to be tackling a very complex subject in the easiest way possible. We're going to be talking about variables. Now, before I start, I just want to say I'm going to assume that you know absolutely nothing about variables, that the whole concept of variables is foreign to you, and I'm going to be starting from absolute ground zero. Now, I bet you're wondering, variables sound like they're kind of scary. They don't make sense. I don't understand them. Does anyone understand them? Yes, people do understand them. I understand them. And yes, they're incredibly important. Simply put, you can't make a large-scale game without variables. Trust me, I've tried. My early days of Project Spark, I managed to build a quest that had you go and kill an enemy and come back and get a prize with no variables. And let's just say it was much, much, much more tedious than if I had just known about the variables. So, this is going to be a quick, easy guide to variables. I'm only going to be going over the 4 ones that you're going to spend 95% of your time on. But first, let's define what is a variable. A variable is a placeholder. It is a item. It is a true-false setting. It is a number. It is a color. It is a position in the world. That is a placeholder for something that can be changed in-game. That's the important piece. So a numeric variable, or one that deals with numbers, you can change it in-game. It can go up, it can go down. You can do math with variables, and in fact, you get to do math quite a bit with variables sometimes. A text variable, you can change the text that's being displayed on screen, or a object variable is a placeholder for different objects in the world. So, that's what a variable is, simply put. They're super important and they're super awesome. So first, let's get into the basics. This logic key is not going to do anything. I'm just going to use it for demonstration. The 4 variables that we're going to be looking at. Now, they're under values. You go to values and you have number, Boolean, object set, text, vector, color, boom camera, fixed, and brain. We are only going to go over number, Boolean, object, and text, because those are really the only ones you're going to use for a while. Now, quickly defined, number variables allow you to change the number, shocker. Boolean variables, or a binary variable, it's kind of along the same term, or a true-false variable, only has 2 states, on or off. You're going to use these constantly, I'll just say it right now. Object variables looks at one single object in the world at a time. That is a key point, that it only looks at one object in the world. An object set can look at more than one object. It can look at anywhere between 1 to, I don't think there's a cap on it, however many objects they allow you to have in the world. Text variables allow you to change the text and written dialogue, and this also allows you to change more than just one line of text. It allows you to do multiple lines of text that you can add together. Vector is a positional Boolean, or not Boolean, a positional variable on the XYZ coordinates of the world, or the XY coordinates of your screen. Color variable lets you change the color of something dynamically throughout the game. And then these look at the different camera settings, and this looks at brain variable, but that gets complicated. We're not getting into that. So, what's the difference, or how do you know the difference between a variable and a static number? So when you come into the numbers panel, you're going to see new number and new number variable. Now, new number variable is where you can open this up, and this is typing the name of the variable. This is not the number that's going to be changed. This is the name of the variable. So let's do starter numeric variable. There we go. So we have a variable, but let's go back to that menu. Now you can access normal numbers here, you probably know that, and then you can access your number variables right here. Alright. So, next there's Boolean variables. These are a little bit simpler because you can't select anything except the variables themselves. This is probably my favorite kind of variable because this allows you to trigger things in the world, so to speak. Like, I'm going to have an example in a bit of us opening and closing a door with a Boolean variable. So, starter Boolean variable. Now it's worth noting these titles are case and case sensitive and all that. So if I was to type starter Boolean variable with upper caps, that is a different variable. This game is, and a lot of code is unforgiving about this, so you need to be careful. Once you create a variable, I would highly recommend you do not you scroll through the list of your variables to reselect it again. Now, if you are on starter Boolean variable, you can go back in and do a new and do exactly the same starter Boolean variable. And if it's spelled exactly the same, it's the same variable. So just keep that in mind. I'm really going to try to keep myself on track here, but it's hard. Object variable. These are a little bit trickier, but this is pretty much the same as before. Yeah, and then text variable. So they're kind of repetitive. But first, let's go over what is the default state of all these variables. Before you define what they are, when you first add them to the world, what are they? So, a numeric variable, if we were to just throw it in here, this is 0. All numeric variables start at 0. That's their default. All Boolean variables start with false. That's just the way that they start. So when you might put a Boolean variable in your world, you don't have to define it as false because it's already started as false. Now, object variables, like this or this, they're defined as nothing. That's different than 0 or false. It's just there's no object assigned to it, so it doesn't do anything at all. And same with text. The text works the same way. Let's do starter text variable. It's just nothing. There's not a space. There's not a comma. There's not put your text here. It's just nothing. So you want to keep those in mind when you're troubleshooting for problems. If you have a text variable that's not displaying right, it could be that the first time you're defining it incorrectly, which means that it's displaying nothing. So, what do I mean by defining a variable? Now, let's say that you're making a gun, and you wanted to, when you entered the world, you wanted your gun to have 8 bullets in it. Now, because it starts at 0, you need to define that it actually needs to start at 8. So we're going to go to when once, and I'm going to copy and paste this. Paste equals 8. I guess we'll do 10. Now, this is important. You have to do it once, because if I was to remove this line of code, starter numeric would be permanently set to 10, because without a when, it runs this line of code constantly, and it will never stop running it. So even if you try to change the starter numeric variable, it will just instantly switch back to 10. So you have to give it some sort of when, or else it'll be permanently fixed to that. Once means that it'll happen once in the entire life of the game. However, started to means that it'll happen once when the text, or when the when property before it is met. So started to is like once, but not as strict, so to speak. But you need to put something here, or else your variable will be permanently defined as what you're defining it as. Now, start with variables, or Boolean variables, I rarely have them start true, but if I was, then I would do once Boolean variable equals true. And then target, it is usually a good idea to establish what is the target. Now, or not the target, an object variable. Object variables are cool because objects can define themselves. So, they could be, let's go to object target equals me. How cool is that, huh? You can define yourself as a Boolean, or object variable. Man, I'm dealing with a lot of variables and stuff here. Now, when I do this, it's permanently affixed to me. So, once again, I'm probably going to throw once around here. Next, okay, where was I? All right, and then text variables you want to define them as once text variable equals hello world. This is tackless. Now what's cool is I can then hit plus over here, go over to math, go to plus, and add more text. You know you want to subscribe to me. Oh yes, no subliminal advertising here. However, unlike the display setting, you cannot change where on the page this is located, and you cannot change the color of the text through this. That's why they have color variables, which are awesome, but we're not going over them today. So you can chain together more than one piece of text. Now, before we expand our knowledge of how this works, I'm going to go over the rules of the variable within this brain. Now, as you can see, we have a bunch of variables, and if we were to define these on a different brain or a different object's code, they would be defined differently. Now, that's because variables have three states. They have local, so to speak. This first one isn't technical. They have local, which is what you're seeing right now. There's no prefix to these variables, so they're local, and that means that they only affect this one object. However, if you insert a line of code in front of the variable, you can go to global, and this means that any other brain in the world that uses global and starter numeric variable side by side will have the same will start at 10, and it'll have the same properties worldwide. So if I incremented this up by 1, then every other brain in the world would be incremented up by 1 if they have the global starter numeric variable. Now there's one other one that I am not going to go into at all. You can go to world properties, campaign, and campaign. Do you see how this looks like several of those global icons? This is a variable that goes between worlds when you have level linking going. But that's as much as I'm going to say, because that gets super complicated. All right. Let's go over a couple other local rules first. First off, variables go between brains. Or not brains, pages. So I can go from this page to this page, and the starter numeric variable will still be worth 10 over here. And if I adjust starter numeric variable, then I go back here and it will be 11, even though we we said it was 10 on this page because we only defined it once, and then we changed it on the next page, then it stays that way. So variables can change between pages, and that's good. You can use that to your advantage a lot. Let's see. If you don't understand how the rules of pages work, then maybe I need to do a guide on that as well. Alrighty. Next, let's look at some uses for these, because right now I've just told you their rules, and their rules may seem a little convoluted, but you'll understand why I'm describing all these rules in detail. Especially up to this point in the video, there's no reason for you to be following along in-game necessarily. You can mostly just be watching this. So I'm going to delete all this because it's not necessary. What we're going to be doing is we're going to think up some ways that we can use these variables in simple-ish ways. Now, I'm going to make... what I'm going to be doing is not the most efficient way, but hey, it works, and we're focusing on Boolean variables, not most efficient way. So I have this door here. You can use any door, but it's sci-fi because it's cool. When I open its brain, there's a no brain. I removed all the code from this brain because it defaults to when detect player, power on, and stuff like that. I removed all that. Then I put these computer monitors here. And you know what? I'm going to delete that. What I'm going to do is when interacted, and then something cool, which I don't understand why it's not in this folder right here, but something cool you can do with Boolean variables is you can go to math and you can do toggle, which toggles them on or off. Then I'm going to do a global door variable. Simple as that. Every time it's interacted, this global door variable toggles between true and false. Now we know that it defaults to false, so we're going to use that to our advantage. I did the exact same code on the computer on the inside of the door too. So we're going to go to this brain, and when global Boolean variable door is equal to true, we're going to do power on. Now we're going to copy and paste this line of code and do false, power off. Since we know that the Boolean defaults to false, we know that the door will start as closed. So let's give that a quick run. So I can come over here, interact, pops the door wide open, and then I can close it from inside and open it and close it. Super simple, huh? Now this is probably one of the most basic ways that you can use a Boolean variable, but you know what? It's a way that you can use it. I like using them in terms of having, I think I've showed off a lot of tutorials using Boolean variables, but you can use them for different attack styles. You can use them for settings, so that like if you have a setting or a mode or a spell, let's say, and you wanted fire on or fire off when you shoot a projectile, if fire on is true, then it shoots a fiery projectile, but when fire is off, then it shoots like an energy projectile or something. I don't know. The Boolean variable is my favorite because it has so many uses. It's fantastic. Next, let's look at a numeric variable. And you know what? Let's make a countdown. So I'm going to throw a computer out here, and we're simply going to make it count down. When interacted, now we're also going to be throwing in a Boolean variable here because this is going to make my life simpler. Going to make this countdown. Countdown equals true. Now this doesn't need to be a global Boolean variable because we're keeping it local to this object. So what we're going to do is when countdown equals true, and we're going to make a child line of code. To do that, select the number, bump it over to the right. Now this line of code will not work until this line of code is met. So this line of code will default to not working. Now let's look at one of my favorite things you can do with a numeric variable, and that is a looping timer. So go to timer and logic, countdown timer, and we're going to go to number, and we're going to do 0.1. That is 1/10 of a second. Then we're going to do loop. What this does is every 1/10 of a second, the lines of code that follow this loop over and 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 over. So then what we're going to do is we're going to create another line of child code beneath that, because you can stack these pretty much as deep as you want. I've never tried to see how deep it can go, but I bet it can go pretty darn deep. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a new numeric variable. We're going to call it counter. And we're going to have it decrement by 0.1. Cool, huh? Now, for the sake of stability, we're going to put started. Because with numeric variables that have decrement or increment, if you don't have a timing piece in place, sometimes they get rambunctious, and every frame they increment up or down by this amount. So it's good to define them with a little bit more stability. All right. So then this counter is going to be going into the negative right away, and I don't really want that. So what we're going to do is I'm going to copy this, paste it. No, not there. We're going to paste it under do, and we're going to do equals 5. There we go. And we're going to do started to, because this is going to activate every time. This is going to activate fresh every time the countdown timer is activated. Let's see. I don't know if I explained that clearly. Every time this Boolean variable goes from false to true, it will reset the counter to 5. Hopefully that made sense. Then lastly, what we're going to do is display the counter above. Now, you may be asking, why are we doing this convoluted countdown timer when we could just do countdown 5? And that's a good question. The reason is that we're displaying it above. This countdown timer does not display numbers. So, but we are going to do a countdown timer. And then we're going to do the variable that we were just in, which is called countdown equals false. There we go. So, this doesn't do much except do a countdown, but it does a countdown with a numeric variable, and that's the idea. See if this bad boy works right. We interact with it, and it starts counting down. And then when it hits 0, it disappears. When I restart it, it starts back up at 5 again. So, countdown timers are always a good thing to have in your world if there's any sort of event that has a countdown timer in it. A displayed countdown timer, might I add you. Because people like to know how much time they have left. There's a lot more applications for the countdown variable than this, but this is just the basics of how it works. You can use this as a gun clip. You can use this in a menu. You can use this to select spells to cast. You can use this to create a random object. Man, I'd like to go into random, but I don't think I have time. Maybe that'll be in the next video. Maybe I'll need to do multiple segments on this. I don't know. We're already at the 21-minute mark, and I'm only halfway done. All right, let's do something else. Now, this is going to be a targeting system that'll be slightly reminiscent of Ocarina. No, I'm not even going to compare it to that. That's too good a game for me to compare it to. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be creating a entire collectiveness that uses all 4 of these variables. And I've already gotten started with it, but you know what? I'm going to delete it all and start again. What we're going to be doing is we're going to make a charged attack that takes 5 seconds to charge. Then it requires a lock-on to an enemy. This lock-on will be defined while we're pressing and holding the left trigger. When you're locked on and your attack is charged, we're going to have a little bit of text pop up on the screen for a second saying, hey, you're good to go. Attack when ready. So, we're going to be incorporating all the elements together. Now, I know we haven't gone over object and text, but that's because those are a little bit simpler. No, I wouldn't even say that. But this puts them all to use here, and I'm going to try to shorten this video up from making it like 2.5 hours long. So, what we're going to do is first we're going to define the charging aspect. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to create a new number variable called charge. Now, because I don't want this charge meter to charge my attack up past 5, we're going to make it so it only charges when this variable is less than 5. So, when less than 5, we're going to do a countdown timer, and we're going to show you something new here. We're going to do countdown timer 1. Now, this means that it's going to count down 1 second. However, that's not very visually interesting, so we're going to turn it into in frames loop. Now, this means that is 1/30th of a second. There are 30 frames in a second in most video games. Some video games like Call of Duty, Titanfall have 60 frames per second, and if you're a PC player, then who knows how many frames a second your games have, but you like to rub it in our faces, so don't be mad at me, PC people. You're all cool. But this means that it will count down every 1 frame, which is very, 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 very fast. So then what we're going to do is charge increment up by 1. Now, or no, not 1, 1/10. Now, why am I not putting a piece of, like a timing piece ahead of this like I did earlier? The answer is, this can't charge any faster. You can't get less than 1 frame. That is the smallest increment of time this game allows. There's no way that it could increment during the period of 2 frames when I'm looping it every 1 frame, if you get what I mean. So then, yeah, that is the charge of it. When, let's see, when charge is greater than or equal to 5. Now, you may be wondering, why am I doing greater than or equal to 5? This is another stability thing. Let's say a player's Project Spark hiccups when they're at 4.99999 seconds, and it actually accidentally kicks it into being 5.1. If I did equal to, you're screwed because it's not 5. However, greater than or equal to says, all right, you're still good, even though the game glitched and gave you a slightly higher variable. A really rare thing, but when it happens, it's frustrating. And we're going to assign y to this. When y pressed, actually, no. We need to do one more thing. When new object variable target. Now, that's it. That's all we're going to do. We're not going to say when target is something. All we need to do is just put target. Now we're going to create another child line of code beneath target, because this means that it only allows us to complete the following action when there is an object assigned to target, which means that then the target variable exists. So then when we press Y, we're going to do, let's call this volley, because we're going to shoot like a burst of attacks. I don't know. Maybe it's a stupid name. I don't know. When you get to the 26th point of a video, you start to have hallucinations and go crazy. So, there we go. And I'm going to put that to pressed. So, then, no, I'm not going to copy it this time. I need to stop copying when I'm doing early beginner tutorials, or else I can get ahead of people. So, when volley is equal to true. Now I bet you're wondering, why aren't you just putting the following lines of code underneath Y? Because you could. Actually, it would work if all the actions you're doing can be performed in one frame or while the Y button is being pressed. Pretty much those are your options. Since I don't want to have them have to press and hold the Y button, and this is going to take more than one frame, I'm going to break it apart into a Boolean variable, and this gives me a little bit more freedom. So, then, when it's true, we're going to, for the duration of, let's do half a second. Shoot. And then let's pick a random object. Something that looked good. We're just going to do Astro Blaster projectile. You can use anything. You could use a spark, because I know those are cool. At speed, and I want this to really fly, so I'm just going to do 50. At our target. Now there we go. This is a very focused and destructive burst of energy, and let's give it some damage too. Let's make this thing punish our target. There we go. Then countdown timer. Now, even though I said earlier that you can't have things that happen faster than one frame, sometimes when the game is reading the code, it reads it in order in one frame. It's a little bit hard to explain, but if I have 5 lines of code in a row, it will read line 1, then line 2, then line 3, then line 4, then line 5, but it does it all instantly in order, so to speak. So let's say that I have a line of code that tells it to destroy this object. It will not perform any of the lines of code beneath it because our object's destroyed. So when I'm closing down this attack, I need to put to set the volley to false at the very end. So volley equals false. But first, I also need to say that the charge variable is spent, or else I'll be able to use it over and over and over and over and over. And that's not all I want. So it equals 0. Once again, you may be wondering, why am I not putting a when piece of code here? That's because these take place in one frame, and this will be shutting down the volley attack, which means it then cuts it off, and it can't interfere with the other code. I hope you follow me. This is some odd stuff I'm talking about here. So, this is a lot of it. Now we need to figure out how are we going to define what our target is, because we can't attack unless we have a target. So, what we're going to do is we're going to do an aiming attack to lock on to a nearby enemy. When left trigger is pressed, when detect enemies, back to sensor, nearest object. And I'll leave it at that. This keeps you pretty close range with your lock on, but that'll work for now. Then target equals it. There we go. And then when no longer left trigger, target equals, and this is important, nothing. If we don't tell it that it equals nothing, then it will remain, the enemy will remain the target forever until that enemy dies. So, pretty much when you're pressing and holding the left trigger, you will make this target. But when you're not pressing and holding, the target will be nothing. Now, for the sake of appearance, we're also going to highlight the target red. There we go. Now, lastly, I said we were going to do something with text, and we are. When charge is greater than or equal to 5, and when there is a target, and we're going to do for the duration of, I don't know, something short, like 3 seconds, we're going to do display, and then a new text variable called status. Screen center. And then we're going to copy and paste the same line of code to when it is less than 5 seconds, and it's still going to be status. But now we need to define what status is each time. Now, this is not the most efficient way to use a text variable, and if you think this is clunky, the way I'm using it is kind of clunky. But this works better if you have like an objective, and when you need to do a quest piece, you can change what that objective's text says. So, but it still works. So when started to status equals the text charging. And I'm going to copy and paste this line of code down here. And it's called, let's see, ready to fire. There we go. So, that was a lot of code we just went over, and that's actually a pretty relatively good attack piece, ignoring all the variables we just learned. If you feel in over your head, what I'll tell you to do is go into a blank world and goof around with them until you understand it. So, there's some enemies over here. When I lock onto one of them, it's not highlighting it, but it's working because I have ready to fire going. Then I press Y. There we go. It fired. I realized I forgot to set the how many shots per second, but it still works. So it's charging, and then ready to fire, and firing. There we go. So you just learned not only how the 4 basic variables work in the world, but you just made something awesome with it. So I hope that you bared with me through these 35-ish minutes. If you have any questions, which, oh my gosh, I know there's going to be lots and lots of questions, because variables are awesome, but they are equally complicated. So please, 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 if you have questions, leave a comment below. If I can't explain it in text, then I'll do a follow-up video to this. I may or may not do a video talking about the more complex variables, because that's one of those things that gets so complicated that it just take forever, and I try to keep my videos shorter than that. This is a darn long video. So, if you have questions, comment. If you have a long question, either comment it or message it to me. So, thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope I wasn't confusing. I hope this was educational. And I hope that now with these skills that you have learned, you can go do awesome things in your world. Like make quests, have leveling systems, have an ammo meter for your gun or a resources or whatever. Have an objective that you can put in your corner, or who knows. All I know is that variables are the heart and soul of every video game. So if you don't have variables in your world, you're simply not going to make a great game. Well, a large-scale game. So, thank you for watching. I will see you guys later.